Meanwhile, the partisanship coursing through Capitol Hill is continuing to infect how Americans view the pandemic and American democracy. This comes as the U.S. hit a grim milestone. More than 700,000 Americans have died from COVID-19. Still, political battles and disinformation about masking and vaccine mandates are fueling angry confrontations at school boards and other public forums. Just incredible video there. And former President Trump and his Republican allies also continue to lie about the 2020 election and drive distrust in government. Laura, this week we saw President Biden get his COVID booster shot on TV, but polls show over and over again that partisanship is the number one factor to looking at how people view this pandemic, whether or not they think boosters, in one poll, whether or not they think that boosters are helpful or not, or sort of looking at it as proving that science doesn't work. Tell me a little bit about how leaders and the White House is looking at restoring trust in American science and what it says about where we are in this pandemic.
Yeah, the White House is very much leaning on local leaders to try to reach, and local doctors to try to reach people, saying that they're the best messengers because they see the polls, they know. There's polls that show and statistics that show that the majority of deaths now are happening in rural counties and primarily Trump voting counties. The death toll is far up in those parts of the country versus in urban, more Democratic areas. And that's because Republicans for so long were saying not to trust the vaccine. We're encouraging, their voters to not wear masks. And so that's what's contributing to that in their predominantly Republican counties. And the White House has been struggling to try to get people to go along with the mask mandates, to actually get the vaccine shot. And you saw some of that frustration finally boil over when they instituted more aggressive mandates. They decided that they were going to institute it for federal employees. They also are really talking to airlines about, can you please institute it for your employees and make sure that that people are continuing to wear masks on planes. So, we're nowhere near the end of this right now.
And they're trying their hardest, essentially, to try to get people vaccinated. But Carl, as we see new mandates rolling out, just today, California said it plans to require FDA-approved COVID vaccines for K through 12 students. That's the first state in the country to do that. But what can leaders do to have more clear messaging on this? And is there any way out of this sort of partisanship that started, of course, before President Biden came into office?
Yeah, I mean, the red-blue divide on this is as stark as anything that has been. I think, President Biden had his booster shot publicly. Mitch McConnell, the Republican leader, came out and said he had his booster shot. He's been a very big promoter of vaccines. I think in Washington even there's a disconnect between some of the Republicans and the Republicans out in the country. I think the booster messaging was very mixed up from the administration at the beginning. That's getting better. But I think at the end of the day, I know there's all this going on with the legislation, with the what's going on Capitol Hill, but Biden's handling of COVID is critical to the Democrats and to his own ability to remain in power.
And that's what I hear from the White House officials, that they understand that COVID, despite all the other things that are going on, is their number one priority. Natasha, connect these two things, the distrust in science and the distrust in government. How much of a national security risk is this? What are you hearing from your sources about how worried they are about this?
Well, we saw this play out in real time with the kidnapping plot against the governor of Michigan earlier this year by people who were so angry over the government's mask mandates, by people who were angry about the restrictions that states were trying to put in place over, to prevent the spread of COVID-19. I mean, the reality at this point is that the national security risk stemming from the distrust in government is really obviously coming from inside. It's coming from inside the house, right? I mean, the rise of domestic terrorism cases that the FBI has been handling has doubled actually over the last year. That's according to the FBI director when he was testifying just last week. So, that's not a coincidence that in the year of the pandemic, in the year of the election, obviously all of these political frustrations were boiling over, and now we're seeing that there is so much more discontent and so much more of a risk, not only to elected leaders, but to school boards, in these local communities, that is stemming from, the mandates that we're seeing put in place. And that is because it's been so politicized. That is because you had people like Donald Trump who were telling people that they should not trust the scientists, sowing distrust in Anthony Fauci, for example, who himself became a target of death threats. This is a major issue for the national security community as they grapple with the threats internally.
And Garrett, some of the safeguards that really ensured that former President Trump, that he was going to have to leave office, they're crumbling. There are a lot of experts who are very, very worried about what's happening across the country. What are you hearing about what lawmakers think about the danger of former President Trump's grip on the Republican Party?
Well, I think a lot of that lies in the work of the Select Committee right now, trying to investigate exactly what happened and the ways in which he inspired the attack here on the Capitol on January 6th, and the reporting that's come out subsequently about the way that the attempts to overturn the election results were and were not coordinated through the White House. I think there's a fear that elements of what we saw on January 6th could be a dress rehearsal for another Trump campaign and another contested election. And so that work, I think, takes on a level of importance that it hadn't necessarily, prior. I think there was sort of people who think that committee's work is more backward-looking, and members of that committee and folks associated with it see it very much as forward-looking because of concern about future elections and the distrust in results. And you're seeing it play out in so many more states. My home state of Texas, for example, now conducting an election audit of a type of 4 of the biggest counties in the state after the president complained about election results there. And so it's not just the January 6th committee, the efforts to pass voting rights legislation, which I already touched on, which is very unlikely to happen at a federal level, but also these questions of who counts the votes and how they do it at the state level that has a lot of folks up here quite nervous about future election results.
Yeah.